Good morning, everybody. My name is Jackie Porter. I'm the Cabinet Member for the Built Environment and Wellbeing, and my remit includes the local plan. So I'd really like to welcome everybody to today's event, which is an important part of the local plan consultation, and it's online until Monday, the 12th of April. This is another of the series of public events, which is for the Your Place, Your Plan Strategic Issues and Priorities document consultation. We're running this as a Teams live event using Slido for the questions, and we're putting forward 9 strategic issues and asking for your views on them. So we're asking today to be involved in 3 different ways. The first one is a series of Slido questions, and they are not specifically as a response to the local plan, but really to check your own knowledge about Winchester and to set the scene of the local plan. And then we'll have a practice question first, just to check the technology is working for you, and just to say that you complete it on your own device and not on the screen of this event. The second part is a series of questions on each of the strategic issues. These will be retained as evidence towards the local plan process. And the third part of the way you can get involved is to ask questions. You can put your questions up at any time during the event. There's a little speech bubble with a question in, and you can use that to put your questions forward. It really helps if we know who's asked the question, but if you prefer to put anonymous, you can do so. So the climate crisis is the biggest challenge that we all face now and in the future. Winchester City Council has declared a climate emergency, and it's taking every opportunity to reduce the district's carbon footprint, and the local plan is a really key part of that work. We want to find ways as well to generate power from non-fossil fuel sources. Our plan to 2038 will need to mitigate the effects of climate change as well. So planning documents are never easy, but so we're really delighted that you've come to join us today and take part in this event, where we can share with you the information about the strategic issues and priorities, and also start to comment about some of the issues that come up, and also to introduce you to our local plan website. I can assure you this isn't just a tick box exercise. There are open text boxes in every part of the consultation process, and we really want to hear your views. If you'd like to ask the question, just submit it during the meeting progresses. As I've said before, you can do so at any time, but I will hold the questions and we'll arrange for them to be answered by the experts at the end of the meeting. So this event is being recorded, and it will be placed on our new local plan website. And if you've looked, the previous events have been already recorded and placed there. And I do recommend you to look at specifically the 2 on the living well and the low carbon living. They've been previous events, and they've been really, really interesting and may well inform your result of your consultation. I'm going to actually hand you over now to Adrian Fox, who's our Strategic Planning Manager at Winchester City Council. He's going to lead you through the presentation and through the detail of the website, and also just introduce you to the question process. So I hope you enjoy the event. Please take part and ask questions as you wish. We really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Councillor Porter, and thank you very much for everybody giving up their Saturday morning to join us on this event. We are at a really important and exciting stage of the local plan in terms of looking to the future to 2038. Next slide, please. So, as Councillor Porter mentioned, we've launched a new local plan website, which is www.localplan.winchester.gov.uk. Hopefully this is a user-friendly way of obviously finding information about the local plan in terms of what is the local plan and the different stages of production, which I'll go through in a minute. And we've identified in the local plan 9 key areas or topics that obviously we feel that it's important for the local plan to address. And I'll go through those in a moment. Next slide, please. We've introduced a new mapping feature on the local plan website that says basically, so you can put your postcode in and you can see exactly what's happening in your immediate area. The idea is that through the local plan process, we're going to add various layers or layers of information to that website. And we'd be really keen to hear what information you feel it would be useful for us to put on that GIS map. But the main thing is that it helps people discover what is happening in their local area in an interactive and exciting way. Next slide, please. So in terms of the local plan process, we're right at the beginning part of the process in terms of producing the strategic issues and priorities document that, as Councillor Porter mentioned, is out for consultation until the 12th of April. So you've got plenty of time to submit your comments. Once we've analysed and assessed any comments that we've received, we will be producing a draft plan, which is known as a Regulation 18 plan. That plan will include specific allocations to meet our housing requirement, which is a key issue that we're seeking feedback on as part of this consultation. In a similar way to this consultation, we will analyse any comments that we receive, and then we will produce a draft Regulation 19 plan. And that is the plan that we will submit to the examination in public, which will be convened by the Secretary of State. The inspector will then determine which people they would like to attend the examination and speak, obviously, for and against the local plan. And we'll then move towards the adoption of the plan. It is a journey and it is a process that we need to go through, which is governed by statute. We're not anticipating that we'll have an adopted local plan by until 2023, which is the date the government wants every local authority to have an up-to-date local plan. Next slide, please. So in terms of the actual document itself, like I say, you can access that through the new local plan website. Within that document, we have to set a vision for the new local plan. In other words, what would the district look like up until 2038? So if I was in the future in 2038 and I was looking back, what type of district would I see? Where would the housing be? Where would the employment be? Where would be the open space? We have an existing vision in the core strategy that runs until 2031. But it's important to obviously take into account any changes that have happened since then. And as Councillor Porter mentioned, the climate emergency is one of those key things that has happened since we adopted the core strategy. So it's important, obviously, the new vision reflects that. So we are seeking views on how the vision should be developed for the new local plan. What are the key issues that we need to address? There was also some work done over the last year with the Town Forum on producing a vision for Winchester itself, and whether or not there are any specific elements from that work that can feed into the overall vision for the district. In terms of obviously setting a vision, it's also important to set a series of objectives, and we've set out a series of sustainable development objectives under the headings of environmental, economic and social infrastructure, and we're seeking feedback on whether or not we've got those right or whether or not they need to be amended. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to hand over to you to Beth, who's going to talk about the first Slido interaction event. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, so as Councillor Porter mentioned at the very beginning of our event, we will be using Slido, which is an interactive software. And this app does work best if you use it on a secondary device, so on a phone or tablet. And when you have downloaded it or go to slido.com, if you can type in the code that is shown on the screen, so 6561, and throughout this event, we will be using it to have quizzes, some word clouds, polls and rating scales, just to help you inform on the topics that we're going to cover, and also to provide you with a very useful background to it. And it'll also provide you with a chance to have your say and inform on the local plan. So this is your opportunity to get involved with this event and also have your say about what matters to you and shaping the local plan. So we're just going to start now with a very informal quiz and just a practice question to start. So what I'm going to do now is give everyone a moment to join the quiz, so you don't have to put your name in. You can stay anonymous, and I'll just let everyone join in with the quiz now. Okay, that's great. I think everyone's had a chance to join in. There is a little bit of a delay with the live event, so I think everyone's had a chance now. So if we go to our first practice question, so what day is it today? Is it Friday, Saturday, Sunday or Monday? I'll give everyone a moment to submit their answers now. Okay, it looks like everyone's had a chance to answer that one. And everyone is correct, it is indeed Saturday today. So on to our first main question. What percentage of people are predicted to be over 65 within the Winchester District by 2038? Is it 28.2%, 12.5%, 23.4% or 17.6%? If you'd all like to submit your answers now. Okay, it looks like everyone's had a chance to answer that one. Let's see what the majority of people went with. So over half said 23.4% and 46% said it was just under 30%. And the right answer was 28.2% of people will be predicted to be over 65 by 2038 in our district. On to the next question. How many homes are required to be built in the Winchester District per year? Is it 1,024? Is it 400, 700 or 550? Please submit your answers now. Okay, so let's see what the majority went with. We've got half of you saying 1,024, a third of you saying 700 per year, only a few saying 400 and a couple more saying 550, and the correct answer is 700 homes per year are required to be built within our district. So our third question, how many listed buildings are there currently within the Winchester District? Is it 2,267, 1,386, 2,038, or is it 3,791? If you can submit your answers now. Okay, let's see what everyone thinks. So we've got quite a split here. So a third saying 2,267, just under a third saying just over 2,000. The correct answer is actually 2,267. So majority there were right. And I'll hand back to Adrian now for the 9 key issues.
Thank you, Beth. Hopefully you found that informative and got you used to the Slido software, which we'll be using again throughout the presentation. So as I mentioned, the local plan is divided up into 9 key issues or topics. Carbon neutrality is at the centre and the climate emergency is at the centre of our new local plan. But we actually felt that it required and justified an extra special topic on itself. So there's a topic on carbon neutrality, biodiversity, natural environment, conserving and enhancing the historic environment, homes for all, the vibrant economy, promoting sustainable transport, living well, low carbon infrastructure and ensuring the delivery of the success of the local plan. And I'm going to go through those in a moment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand back to Beth now to run through the next Slido question with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So as we've just pointed out, the 9 key priorities, we want to find out what are the most important priorities for you in the new local plan. And with this question, you can pick up to 3 different ones. So as Adrian's just run through them, I will go through them again. Is it carbon neutrality? Is it the biodiversity and natural environment? Is it conserving and enhancing the historic environment? Is it homes for all? Creating a vibrant economy? Promoting sustainable travel? Living well? A low carbon infrastructure and local plan viability? Or the delivery and success of the local plan? So if you can submit your answers now. Okay, some really interesting results there. So for the majority of those in attendance of today's event, biodiversity and the natural environment is the #1 priority, followed by living well and carbon neutrality, and also promoting sustainable transport and active travel, and homes for all within the top 5. I think everyone's had a chance to answer that one now. Thank you for your views and participating in that. I'll hand back to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. As I mentioned, the climate emergency is at the heart of the new local plan and is the driving force for obviously what we do in terms of the local plan. You'll be aware that the government is committed to obviously have net zero gas emissions by 2050, but the City Council believes that we need to move faster than that, and we want to obviously achieve that a lot quicker than 2050 by 2030, and obviously that's a key priority for the City Council. The local plan is one of the tools, albeit a very important tool, to help support the reduction in carbon emissions across the district. And it is important to say that there are other tools that are available to assist us with moving on that journey. We are proposing in the consultation to have a strategic policy on climate change because we feel that it is so important. And other local policies on carbon neutrality, which we've outlined in the document itself, to help us move towards carbon neutrality. So next slide, please. So I'm going to hand you to Beth now to do another Slido quiz. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, this is a really interesting one. We're going to use a word cloud here to understand your views on what do you think are the most important things the local plan can do to reduce carbon emissions. And on this one, you can answer as many times and submit as many different answers as you like. And then when more people say the same thing, we can then see that that word will get bigger. So we can see what the priorities are within this word cloud. I'll give you all a moment now to submit your answers. Some really interesting answers coming through now. So transport and planting trees, quite a key priority. Also building low carbon houses, more travel options through leadership, local employment and better public transport. We've got solar panels on all new homes, reaching our UN sustainability goals, more grants, better pavements, charging points, the location of development and efficient home heating. Some really good answers coming through now. Thank you, everyone. We've got rewilding, no greenbelt developments, education, wildlife, conserving the environment, more green infrastructure. This is a really great word cloud. Thank you everyone for participating. I think everyone's just finishing up submitting their answers. I won't move on just yet. I think we've got a few more coming through. That's great. So we can see that trees and transport are the two main top priorities, and insulation, cycle lanes, low carbon homes, reducing traffic, all very important to a lot of you. That's great. Thank you for that. I'll pass now back to Adrian.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you for everybody participating in that word cloud. That was really helpful. Thank you. Next slide, please, Beth. Oh.
Sorry about that. There we go.
Thank you. So the next topic I want to talk about is the biodiversity in the natural environment. So as part of the consultation, we are asking people about biodiversity net gain. This is a new requirement by the government to ensure that obviously we address biodiversity as part of the development process. And we are keen to hear from people about how obviously we should go about that and how financial contributions should be allocated. We are keen to know about land for open space and biodiversity, and we are very important obviously now as a result of COVID, the importance of open space and how we use that in terms of our health and well-being. We are interested as part of this consultation to hear people's feedback on our current approaches to the countryside protection. In other words, are they working at the moment or do they need to be tweaked? Or whether or not there is justification for a new green belt to be allocated in the new local plan. I must add that there are key requirements and a very high bar that needs to be met in terms of the national planning policy framework. So if anybody is very interested in the green belt issue, I could perhaps encourage you to look at the government's national policy framework to have a look at obviously the section on green belt. But we are seeking a question on that because we know it's been raised by CPRE, so we are welcoming comments on that particular issue. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to Beth now to go through the next slide. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Adrian. So yeah, we would like to hear from you how successful you think the council have been in balancing that protecting the countryside from unplanned development. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least successful and 10 being the most successful. Okay, so quite an even split here with an average score of 5.4 at the moment. I'll leave this open just a few more moments so everyone can have a chance to vote. Okay, so an average score of 4.7. I think everyone's had a chance there to participate, so thank you everyone. I'll pass back to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. The next topic I'd like to talk about is conserving and enhancing the historic environment. We're blessed in terms of the Winchester District in terms of having a fantastic wealth of historic buildings. We are keen as part of this consultation to hear whether the existing heritage policies are adequate. In other words, are they working successfully or could they be improved? And linked to the council's climate emergency is how can the local plan support energy efficiency improvements to listed buildings whilst preventing harm to their heritage features? And that's a really important issue that we'd like to hear anybody's comments back from as part of this consultation. Next slide, please. One of the issues that generates often a lot of comments as part of any consultation is homes for all. As part of this consultation, we've had to identify and develop 4 different alternative growth options for how we could accommodate the growth in the future across the district. The first approach is, should we continue with the current approach in the core strategy, which distributes development according to the sustainable hierarchy of settlements? In other words, should we do the kind of same approach that we did in the adopted core strategy? The second alternative approach is, Should we focus more development at Winchester because it's the most sustainable location in terms of jobs, services and amenities and access to transport, and other larger, more sustainable settlements? The third alternative option for accommodating the new growth is, should we consider one or more completely new strategic allocations or new settlements in the local plan to accommodate our growth requirements? And the fourth alternative option is, should we distribute development around the district largely in proportion to the size of the existing settlements? And we are very keen, as part of this consultation, to hear your feedback on those different alternative options, because they will help shape and inform the development strategy that is in the next version of the local plan, and which sites from the Sheila sites we allocate for new development. Thank you. Next slide. So I'm going to hand back to Beth now to do another Slido questionnaire. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And we'd like to hear from all of you and how COVID might have changed your housing needs. And for this one, you can tick all that apply to you. So is it more need for flexible spaces? Is it bigger gardens? Is being close to outdoor facilities more or less important now? And the same, is it more important to be closer to shops, or has it become less important? And is it more important to be close to transport links, or is this now less important to you? So we'd really like to hear your views on how COVID has changed your housing needs. Okay, so we've got some really interesting answers coming through. So majority saying that being closer to outdoor facilities is now more important. The need for flexible spaces and larger gardens is also very important. And being closer to shops and transport links are also quite important now. Okay, that's brilliant. I think everyone's had a chance there to answer. Thank you all for participating. It's really good to understand that. Thank you. I'll hand back to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. The next topic I want to talk about is the vibrant economy. Clearly, we're all aware of the negative impacts of COVID in terms of obviously the impact that it's having on our shops and our services and facilities. And clearly, as a result of that, our working patterns have changed, and there's been a reduction in the footfall in the town centres, which may affect obviously the economic viability of them. So as part of this consultation, we are seeking views on what type of economic development should we consider, what is the future role of town centres and the uses within them, and linked to obviously the council's climate emergency is what opportunities should there be in the rural area for employment opportunities in order to avoid people having to travel long distances to work. Linked to that is, how can the local plan support home working, and what measures should we introduce in the local plan to facilitate that? And how can the local plan support the development of the green economy and carbon neutrality? And they're all key questions that we're very keen to have your feedback on as part of this consultation. Next slide, please. The next topic is promoting sustainable transport. As part of the consultation, we are seeking your views on whether the existing policies are ambitious enough or whether or not they can be improved, and whether or not development should be concentrated in locations that already have cycling, walking and public transport, and whether or not additional park and ride facilities are needed, and if so, where. And linked to that is one of the other ideas that we put forward in the strategic issues and priorities document is the idea of 20-minute neighbourhoods. Next slide, please. Living well is the next topic, and clearly that came up in the Slido results. And the places that we build today will influence people's health and well-being of the residents in the future. So as part of the consultation, we are seeking your views on access to the countryside and open spaces and how they should be connected together to help reduce inequalities, and how to create strong communities and neighbourhoods which respond to the health and well-being agenda, which is really important as a result of, obviously, it's come to the forefront as a result of COVID. And as I mentioned, we are also putting forward the idea of 15-minute neighbourhoods and how that might be developed in the district. Clearly, that's not going to work everywhere, but clearly it can work across a large part of the district. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand back to Beth now to do the next Slido one. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. So yeah, this is our last Slido of this event, and we'd just like to hear from you. What would you like to see more of within our towns and high streets across the district in the future? And again, this is a word cloud, so you're not limited to how many answers you can submit. And the words that are then said again by others in the event, we can then see that are priority to the majority of you. So I'll give you all a moment now to submit your answers. Okay, again, lots of really great answers coming through, and more open spaces, and we can see that pedestrian areas are quite a priority to a lot of you. Some more independent shops and provision for wildlife, sports clubhouses, making it economically sustainable, lower business rates, transport cycling, local housing, making sure it's disabled friendly, easy access to vehicles, and make it more friendly for walking. We can see sustainable shopping, more markets and vibrant creative spaces, more leisure facilities, again, green infrastructure and climate positive homes, electric bicycles, more cycle lanes and social spaces, so here it's becoming clear that green spaces, trees and open spaces are very key to you all. More green infrastructure is very important also. Still got lots of answers coming through, so I'll leave this one open for a few more moments. That's great. We've got some really great answers coming through there. So thank you all for those, and thank you for participating. So that was our last Slido of the event, but it's been really great to see all those answers and really useful for us getting your views. I'll hand back to Adrian now.
Thank you, Beth. The next topic is low carbon infrastructure and local plan viability. So we are seeking your feedback as part of this consultation on a number of possible strategies and approaches towards low carbon infrastructure, such as how can we support renewable energy in the district and low carbon infrastructure. And we're really keen to hear your feedback on that matter. And how can we support proposals for domestic battery storage facilities in tandem with low carbon infrastructure. We are also undertaking a call for sites for renewable energy sites in order to boost the race to renewable energy rates in the district. And I'll come on to the call for sites in a second. Next slide, please. So one of the key things is how can we know whether or not the local plan that we're preparing now will be successful, and what monitoring indicators can we include in the local plan? It's very important when you're starting off with anything to think about how you're going to monitor whether or not you are on track, or obviously there needs to be improvements. Every year the local authority produces an authority monitoring report, and that's available on the website. That monitors the effectiveness of existing policies and strategies to see whether or not we are on track, or whether or not obviously things need to be changed. But it's really important to think about the monitoring framework right at the beginning part of the local plans process and not at the end. And how can we develop monitoring indicators to see whether or not we are on track and we are going to reach zero carbon by 2030. And that's really important that we think about those questions now, right at the beginning part of the local plan process. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, in parallel with the consultation on the strategic issues and priorities document, we are doing a call for sites. We are doing a call for sites for brownfield sites, for housing sites and employment sites, gypsy and traveller sites, renewable energy sites, biodiversity offsetting, carbon offsetting, and nitrates, which is a big issue in Hampshire, nitrate offsetting, and green infrastructure. And we would be really keen to hear from landowners, land promoters, developers about which sites they think are suitable for development. And that is open again till the 12th of April. Next slide, please. So how can you respond to the strategic issues and priorities consultation document? Well, I really hope that as part of this event, I can encourage you to go onto the new local plan website that's on the screen there. And under the button, have your say, there is different ways that you can get involved. Next slide, please. So you can register for email alerts in terms of the progress on the local plan. You can undertake a short polls. There's 2 short polls on the website that you can participate in. You can, and we would encourage you to go to Citizen Space, where you can view the full consultation. We devised this so if you're only interested in one specific topic or 2 topics, you can go in and you can answer that specific topic. You don't have to answer 9 specific topics. So if you're only interested in carbon neutrality, please click on the carbon neutrality one and only answer the questions there. And as Councillor Porter mentioned, there is a free-flowing text box at the end of the consultation. And alternatively, you can submit comments to the planning policy email address. But we would really encourage you as a result of this event to participate in the consultation, because we are really keen to hear your views. Next slide, please. So how are we going about engaging with people? Well, clearly this event is one of those ways. We are using social media to reach out and engage with a lot of the younger audience in terms of Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We have run radio advertisements on Wave Radio. We put a series of posters around the district. We've sent them to parish councils, to supermarkets, to GP premises, to hospitals and convenience stores. And we are trying to actively raise the profile of this consultation, appreciating that it is done during lockdown. We've run newspaper advertisements in the Chronicle and the Mid Hants Observer. And we've done some bus stop advertising because we appreciate that a lot of people are walking around in terms of exercise, because obviously clearly they can't go to shops or cafes at the moment. And we publicised the local plan consultation on the website, and we're really keen to encourage the parish councils to help spread the word, and obviously using the council's other techniques that obviously we've got Facebook, Instagram page and newsletters. But if anybody has got any ways that we can encourage more people to engage with the local plan process, please do let us know, because we do need everybody's help to raise the profile and the awareness of this consultation. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to hand you over to Councillor Porter, who's going to look at the questions that have been raised and host the next bit of the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian and Bethany, and I hope that everybody can still hear the event. We've had a couple of queries where there've been a problem, so hopefully everybody can hear us now. I'm just going to publish some of the questions and have a look and see if we can join some of them together to give responses. But the first one is, please can you clarify what's the difference between approach 1 and approach 2 under the Homes for All? I think I'll pass back to Adrian Fox for that one.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. I would probably encourage you to have a look at the local plan website. Under Have Your Say section, you can have a look at the full version of the Strategic Issues and Priorities document. Within that document itself, probably if you have a look at page 39 of the actual document, what it does is it includes a table for each of the options, and obviously works out how basically we've come up with the number, what's already development in the pipeline in terms of which sites have already got planning permission and consented development or under construction, and what is actually required. But very broadly, what it's saying is that the housing requirement for option 1 under, for example, Winchester Town is 4,500. But the good news is we've already got 3,271 houses already in the pipeline. So the additional housing that we require under this growth option 1 would be 1,229 in Winchester Town. And what it does is it talks you through in those tables, which I'd encourage you to have a look at, under Winchester Town and South Hampshire. So now if we have a look at option 2, again within the document we've identified the kind of pros and cons of that. Under Winchester Town, the housing requirement under that option would be 5,000 dwellings. We still have, as I said, the 3,271 housing commitments already in the kind of pipeline. So the additional housing requirement under option 2 would be 1,229. So like I say, each of the options is explained in the document itself in terms of what does it actually mean, and particularly what does it mean for the Winchester Town, the South Hampshire urban area, the market towns and Winchester District. And then later on in the document, there is a table that includes the comparison between the different options, so you can quickly have a look and see what the different options mean, and obviously the housing requirement. So if I could encourage you to have a look at the actual Strategic Issues and Priorities document that's under Have Your Say option on the new website. Like I say, it will go into detail and you can have a look at what does it actually mean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I think the next one actually probably also comes back for you. The Houses for All question doesn't cover the important element of spatial planning. How does public transport work, or how can it be made to work with the new housing areas? I think that relates to particularly to 4, but also to all of them, doesn't it? Would you like to just comment on that?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Yeah, really good question there. That obviously spatial planning and placemaking, as I like to call it, is a really critical element of the new local plan. And obviously how we ensure that those places that we are planning in terms of the most appropriate location are actually connected together to ensure that we've obviously got the public transport connections. And that could be buses, but also that's cycling and walking. And that's a key part of our new development strategy, is how can we think about that? And there is a key question on promoting sustainable transport in terms of how can we make sure that this actually happens. Now, clearly, the City Council doesn't operate buses, that's undertaken by Stagecoach. But we have a really important role in making sure that what sites we allocate are actually accessible to sustainable transport network. So that is a key requirement that we need to do. And like I say, it does come back to actual spatial planning and proper place making to ensure that we are planning the new sites in the most appropriate location. And we will be talking to, as part of our infrastructure delivery plan, our service providers such as Stagecoach and other people to ensure that obviously the local plan can come forward and allocate sites that are supported by accessible public transport modes. Thank you.
And of course, very, very recently, the Bus Back Better document has come out from central government, and that's really key to some of the ways we can actually really support sustainable travel. And I'm going to say the other point is really from that is it's not just about finding travel routes that already exist and linking to travel routes already exist, but perhaps putting other travel routes in place as well. I'm just going to go back to the person that wrote that question, because their first question, I think they put in the title, which is, are housing predictions of social need, are housing predictions actually predictions of social need or commercial demand? And I think that's a really interesting question. Adrian, would you like to comment on that as well?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. The housing requirement that we've got, which is the just under 700 dwellings a year, is set by a standard methodology. That methodology takes into account, and it is set by government, that methodology, in terms of future household projections and the affordable housing need. So in other words, the formula basically takes into account a number of factors, and it is kind of amended every 2 years and every 1 year to take account of projections and obviously affordable housing needs. And that figure can go up, but at the moment it's set just under 700 dwellings. So it's kind of set in terms of obviously how it's determined, that's set by government, but it's not kind of commercial need. It is based on facts in terms of obviously our projected needs and obviously affordable housing needs.
And obviously we're all, the other thing we're doing is this weekend completing the census, and that sort of information which comes out is incredibly important in planning for future communities, not just now but right into the future. And I'm just going to raise the point that Adrian pointed out, that some of the documentation on the website, well, all of it is relevant, but it may be useful to look at the settlement hierarchy document as part of your consideration of the response on that one. Georgie has asked, how do you ensure there's not a free-for-all until the new local plan is adopted in 2023? Mr. Finch, would you like to answer that? Because it's part of the regulatory process, isn't it?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Porter, and I'd like to say hello to everybody and thank you for taking time out of your Saturday morning to join us on this. For those that don't know me, as I'm Simon Finch and I'm head of regulatory services, which includes all things planning, and have been for a little while. So I've had a little bit of experience of doing this. Excuse me. Basically, the way that local plans work is that you have to periodically update the plan that you've got. So we have a local plan which we've mentioned already, and that is still current. And so any planning applications that come forward currently will be assessed against the policies within that plan and the National Planning Policy Framework. You'll hear a lot about NPPF because that's the overarching national policy that feeds down, that we have to interpret and take into the local level. So at the moment, we will still process planning applications under the current local plan, but the reason that we need to get on and do this job and get a replacement plan in place is the longer that you leave it and the older it becomes, then the more vulnerable ultimately that you can become to development. And I won't name them, but some of our neighbours in Hampshire have had some real difficulties, either because they haven't been able to deliver the housing numbers in their plan, or their plan is a bit long in the tooth. So that's why it's imperative that we move forward at a pace. But at the moment, we've still got a plan which is not out of date. It's still used and will be used to assess any proposals that come forward before the new plan is adopted. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. I'm going to put you back on the spot on this one, Mr. Finch. Could you just talk about the 5-year land supply?
Oh, I hope you weren't going to ask me. That's very complicated. No, basically, yeah, but in very simple terms, and my learned colleague, Mr. Fox, will no doubt tell us if we've not got this right. But in very simple terms, there is a way to work that out. In other words, it goes back to the point I made earlier, actually, that it's one thing having a local plan. That's your starting point, and it's clearly very important. The trouble is, if you don't deliver what's in it and it doesn't perform as it should do, particularly in terms of delivery of housing numbers, and that is monitored in something called the annual monitoring report, which we all do in Hampshire and across the country, to make sure that the council is delivering on the commitments within its local plan. To date, that has not been a particular problem for us, but to some degree, it's not down to the council, because we don't build a lot of housing. We build some, which is council housing and affordable housing, but we don't build the vast majority. So to some degree, there can be other influences at play which will affect that housing land supply. But basically, there's a methodology for it. If you deliver against that on your 5-year housing land supply, then basically it means your plan is delivering the numbers that it's required to deliver, and you stick with the plan. If you can't do that, and some are struggling to do that or haven't achieved it, then it becomes more difficult to deal with other applications that come forward for housing which are not allocated within your local plan. And I live very near to a district that is in that position, and you know, there are lots of reasons for that. That's not a criticism necessarily of any council, because as I've just mentioned, it's a complex picture as to why houses get built or they don't get built. So it's not just simply having an up-to-date local plan. So I wouldn't want to imply any criticism in any of those other councils, but clearly where you can't show that 5-year land supply, it makes planning in your district a lot more complicated. I hope that's captured it. I don't know if Mr. Fox thinks that he can add anything or correct anything I've said, but that's simplistic. That's how it works, I think. Yeah,
I think we're going to move on because there are more questions now to come forward, but I think it's a useful point because, of course, we can give all the permissions we like, but actually if the developers don't actually develop them out, then that's the challenge. And actually people may well be, I can see there's a lot of comments about homes. It's useful to see that authority monitoring report, and that's also on the information for this particular section in the plan. So the next one is from Neil Rusbridger. Do you expect planning law to be more supportive of your objectives, as currently Winchester has not always upheld even some of its own policies? I'm not quite sure in what way, Mr. Rusbridger, but perhaps you might like to comment back to that separately. But the point I was going to just suggest that Adrian answers that. Do you expect planning law to be more supportive of your objectives?
I think if I can start, and I think Mr. Finch might want to add something, but in terms of obviously where we are now, the existing core strategy obviously and the other document are obviously the starting point for determining planning applications. Now clearly there's been a lot of changes the government has introduced in terms of permitted development rights, in terms of obviously encouraging changes of uses, particularly to residential. But the key thing is that we monitor each of our policies and how successful they have in terms of whether or not they've been upheld at appeal, or whether or not obviously we've lost appeals, in terms of obviously how successful they are, and we'll continue to do that. Now clearly as the local plan moves forward, the new local plan that is, it will gain weight as it goes through the process, but clearly until it's actually adopted, it won't replace the existing obviously local plan documents itself. So obviously, but it will gain weight as it goes through the process. Now, climate emergency and climate change is one of the key things that obviously we want to strengthen in the new local plan, because I know obviously in the existing core strategy we did have to go for sustainable homes, but unfortunately obviously the government withdrew that. So we can't enforce that, but we are keen as part of the new local plan to introduce new policies to address obviously the climate emergency. So like I say, they will gain weight as they move through the various processes, and obviously once they're adopted, they will replace the existing policies in the core strategy and the other documents. So like I say, the key thing is that the policies themselves, at the moment, we're determined against the existing local plan policies, but as this new local plan moves through the process, it will gain weight. And obviously we want to develop and obviously introduce policies that will be upheld and obviously applied to. That's the key thing. But the key thing is to obviously look at the authority monitoring report, because that does monitor the success or otherwise of the policies. Thank you.
Thank you. The questions are pouring in now. We've got 19 still to go, so I really want to try and speed up a little bit. But Mr. Blair says, an observation, current home builders in Winchester rarely seem to use low embodied carbon building methods. Any thoughts? I think possibly this may be suitable for Adrian or Jill to respond to.
If I perhaps start, Councillor Porter. In terms of obviously the current house builders, we can't influence anything in this new local plan in terms of what's already got consent. But what we can influence is obviously what's going to happen in the future. And part of that is an education and training that we need to obviously encourage our partners, our developer partners and our home builders to obviously embrace. Now, the government in parallel with that is changing the building regulations, and that is really important because the building regulations determine what developers have to obviously build to. And the government is very clear that they want to ramp up the kind of sustainable credentials of how houses are built. And obviously, if they introduce that and they've got a timetable which they've just recently consulted on, that will help us obviously move towards obviously a more sustainable future. But part of it is an education and development. We as officers, there's a number of officers in the council who have done some carbon literacy training, and we obviously need to encourage obviously developers to understand what we're trying to achieve and what it's all about. So obviously it's part of obviously the local plan process. But the key thing is building regulations will be changing. Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll just talk about that again at the end. Mr. Rusbridger, I think we'll perhaps try and contact you separately and have a talk about the conversation you've got there. So the next question was, what's the time limit for comments? It's midnight on the 12th of April, which is the Monday after Easter. So please do respond up to then. Thank you very much. The next one is Mr. de Groot. Under the heading of creating a vibrant economy, has there been any consideration for encouraging high value carbon neutral businesses, e.g. IT consultancies, R&D laboratories and so on? I think probably yes, I'll say, Adrian, is it possibly your question or was it Simon's?
I can start, Councillor Porter. I think there that's a really important question that the person's raised. And I think that's exactly part of the consultation feedback that we want to hear. We have just commissioned consultants to do a green economic development study to obviously look at what opportunities there are for obviously encouraging obviously carbon neutral businesses into the district. And I think that work will be picked up in that work stream. But like I say, we need to think about how the economy has changed, particularly as a result of COVID. So, for example, do we need to encourage kind of office hubs and things like that as part of obviously our development? But yes, it's a very important question. We are just commencing on a green economic development strategy where there will be consultation on it. My colleagues in the economic development team have just literally commissioned consultants to look at that. So a really important question and a key issue that we'd like feedback on how we can do that. Thank you.
Yes, and the employment study was done in autumn 2019. It was updated again in March 2020, but we all know how technology has moved the whole world on in the last 12 months, and so that's why we've waited till this point, but actually put out another consultation and another process to re-look at that now. And we want local jobs to be good jobs, and I think your point's well made. Mr. Blair said, do PV solar panels really contribute to carbon neutrality as they have very high embodied carbon? And in our carbon neutrality event, that subject was raised and covered really, really well through Clara from Letty. I do suggest you have a quick listen to that presentation as part of the your consideration. I think it was a very interesting point that we don't just think that solar panels will effectively balance out what our use of electricity is. We need to think about reducing the electricity demand as well. I'm going to go on to the next one. What are councils planning for their own activities to be carbon neutral or indeed restorative so they can demonstrate leadership? Mr. Finch, think for you possibly?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question because as Adrian Fox explained at the beginning, we've got a number of things in the toolkit, and local plan is one, and it's a really key one. But what the local plan can do is shape development, and it can shape development in terms of energy performance, location of development, minimising the need to travel, all of those sorts of factors that we've talked about today and people have raised through Slido, etc. But also, the council can act as an authority in its own right. So whether it's how it builds its new houses under a local under its own housing programme, or other plans that it puts in place. And I have colleagues that work on this. We have a carbon neutrality plan, etc. It followed on from the declaration of the climate emergency, as a result of which there are a number of elements that we are bringing forward. And it can include things about how you source your energy. It can include how you sort of fit buildings out in terms of energy performance and energy generation, etc. So there's a whole raft of measures which the council is doing in its own right to influence its own carbon footprint. The only thing I would just add to that is, in the scheme of things, whilst we should be doing all of those things and leading effectively, and that's what the carbon neutrality plan is all about, overall it's a very modest percentage of the district and its emissions, which is why initiatives like the local plan, which can shape development, the location, its performance, etc., is a really important tool in that toolbox. But as I say, we've got plenty of information on the website about what the council is doing in terms of leading that and what it's doing to its own estate and assets, etc., to improve their performance. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. And the next question is, has it been considered for the need for South Hampshire Transport Plan? Should there be a body to oversee this? In fact, there is a South East Transport Plan, which is overseen by the Executive Member for Transport and Economy at the County Council. But I wondered, does Adrian want to answer this one?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. The County Council are currently in the process of updating their local transport plan, and I believe consultation on that will start in the summer. We are also a member of the Partnership for South Hampshire, and we're doing a series of work with them in terms of evidence base and studies in terms of obviously our duty to cooperate needs. So there is work ongoing at the moment through the push work to look at strategic development areas, to look at strategic issues such as Greenbelt and a number of other issues. So the Partnership for South Hampshire is something that we're an active member of, but in parallel with that, Hampshire County Council are updating their local transport plan, and that will pick up on, obviously the Hampshire County Council also declared a climate emergency, so that will pick up on a number of key issues that obviously we've raised this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, does the City Council have any power for ensuring new housing is more carbon neutral and wildlife friendly, e.g. installing Swift boxes? In fact, in many cases we already do that, particularly in the slightly larger developments. One of the comments has come, for instance, the air quality SPD is now looking at trying to make sure that sort of thing happens on the smaller sites too. That is actually one of the questions in the local plan document, to see if we can add in biodiversity net gain into the policies, but actually it's now part of the overall the UK's or England's policies. Adrian, do you want to comment on that?
I think that's again a really important question, and something that we would be keen to have feedback on as part of the strategic issues and priorities document, because clearly making sure carbon houses are carbon neutral is at the heart of the new local plan. And how can we develop obviously more wildlife friendly areas, and what kind of multifunctional areas, if I could call it that, can we create in terms of green infrastructure? Well, there's a win for wildlife, and there's also a win for obviously people's health and well-being. And how can we connect those areas together? We have started on work on a baseline green infrastructure study, which basically is looking at what green infrastructure we've got. And we're looking obviously to develop that further when we come up with the development strategy about how we can link these places together in terms of green infrastructure, and how can they have multiple benefits in terms of obviously wildlife and people. So it is something that we're keen to have feedback on as part of this consultation process. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, it talks about the question asked about ensuring new housing is more carbon neutral. I think we've covered that in our statements. Unfortunately, because of the local plan, the previous one set up, it doesn't give us the opportunity to do what's called a supplementary planning document to strengthen that argument at the moment. And so we're relying at the moment on national policy and an emerging local plan. So it's really important you do make your comments back. And I'm just going to tie up with that question, but I'll go back to the one before in a minute. What plans are there to support strategic open spaces and also strategic gaps? Adrian, I think that's definitely for you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. We've obviously at the moment got a number of gaps identified in the existing local plan. They need to be reviewed, and a key part of the consultation is whether or not those kind of policies that we've got in the existing core strategy are actually working at the moment, and how can we support obviously the protection and obviously the enhancement of open space. So like I say, we need to review all of the existing policies in the local plan itself and see whether or not there needs to be any improvement, and obviously look at obviously alternative ways. And as I mentioned, we are seeking feedback as part of this consultation whether or not the existing policies are working or whether or not we should be looking at alternative policies. So that's a key part of this consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Simon, I'm going to ask you the question. Anonymous has written in, what happens where covenant with no permitted development, i.e. in Badger Farm? Do you want to answer that one?
Yes, I can do. There are certain developments when they were permitted, as people probably know, permitted development rights just simply, in the simplest terms, means what you can generally do without having to apply for full planning permission to extend your property, if we're talking about domestic properties. But it applies across a whole range of different types of buildings, uses, particularly in town centres, industrial areas and all sorts. So it's something which the government's very keen on at the moment, to relax those or extend those rights to move between different uses. But in terms of residential areas, as Whiteley is another one, where they are quite dense forms of development, then sometimes we have removed or restricted the right to extend property without applying for full permission, only because, not to say that you cannot do that, only that you need to apply for it. And the reason for that is to make sure that by exercising those rights, which would have otherwise been the case, and they could have resulted in perhaps developments were not particularly sympathetic to the neighbouring properties or whatever. So in those types of development, particularly on estate type developments, some of them have had those permitted development rights restricted. And all that really means is it's not that you can't do it. It's so your property can be adaptable, it can be changed, but you simply have to apply for planning permission from the council to do it. And what that means is we can assess it, we can consult with the neighbours, etc., and make sure that that development, that change, is appropriate for everybody. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. I think that probably ties up with the next question. Mr. de Groot says, if it's a comment really, if we want to expand green belts and wild areas and there are ever increasing new housing needs, then existing brownfield and old housing will need to be redeveloped. This comes with a cost. This cost needs to be provided for us. It's a long-term strategic issue. I think actually this is probably an Adrian question because it relates to viability, doesn't it, Adrian?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. It does indeed, in terms of obviously how we can actually obviously plan in terms of the future. But the key thing is in terms of obviously how we plan for that. We are keen as part of this consultation to hear feedback from, and we are very keen to use brownfield sites and obviously redevelop existing sites to obviously provide housing where they can be easily accessible. Now, brownfield sites tend to have a higher cost in terms of remediation and things like that you need to obviously do, but clearly they are often in a very sustainable location, so we are very keen to look at that. What we have to do is make sure that the local plan is viable in terms of obviously everything that we put in the local plan. In other words, all the policies that we put in the local plan need to be tested against a local plan viability assessment to make sure that the policies are actually deliverable. So in other words, we don't include things that ask of developers that make the actual sites undeliverable. And that's a really important study that needs to be commissioned. And the way I describe it is there's only so much of the pie in terms of obviously you require affordable housing contributions, often open space, and a range of other contributions towards transport and other infrastructure. So we need to, as part of the local plan develops, undertake a local plan viability assessment that looks at all the asks of developers to make sure obviously that what we're proposing in the local plan is actually deliverable. I'm not sure if Mr. Finch wants to add anything else to that. Thank you.
Mr. Finch, did you?
No, I think it's covered it quite nicely, actually. I think with anything with this, with all what we've got to do, you've got to. It's a really good question, actually, because when you're doing a local plan and you're setting out your policies, your locations for development, etc., it's really important. As I said when we talked about the 5-year housing land supply, you need to make sure that your plan is deliverable. Otherwise, it won't get past a local plan inspector, and ultimately, before the plan becomes adopted, as Adrian Fox explained at the beginning of the presentation, we've got to go through various stages, and towards the end of the process, we've got to get the plan through a local plan inquiry with an independent local, with a government appointed inspector, and then adopt it. To do that, we need a really good evidence base, and part of the evidence base, which affects the deliverability, is the viability assessment of that, because if you're not careful, you could end up with a plan, in actual fact, that you're going to struggle to deliver. It won't perform, and if that is the case, then that causes real problems. So I think you have to look at all of these factors, whether it's carbon neutrality, very important, delivery of affordable housing, open space, etc. But you've got to look at the viability of the development, because otherwise you won't get the development that you need to plan for delivered. So viability is really is a very important consideration that you have to, which sort of counterbalances against all the stuff that you need to do, because otherwise you won't get it through the local plan inquiry in any event. So it's got to be sound, and that's part of the soundness. Thank you.
Yeah, I've actually got a piece of paper stuck on my wall in front of my desk which says a vision without a plan is a daydream, but a plan without a vision is a nightmare. But I think we're very, very clear that actually you can't put forward a piece of property, a piece of land for development if it's just something that we think it's a good idea, but it isn't viable. It has to be viable so that the developer wants to build it out, because otherwise, going back to our monitoring report comment, you've got to have that so that it can be provided at a price that works. That's the challenge of a local plan, really. Neil Rusbridge has asked, what support will there be for neighbourhood plans? Adrian.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. We're currently working with Denmead Parish Council to work with refreshing their neighbourhood development plan. Hursley Parish Council have recently contacted us and will be preparing a neighbourhood development plan for their area as well. It is very important when we talk about neighbourhood development plans to think about whether or not they are the right tool for the actual job that's actually intended. The government recently consulted on the white paper, and it was particularly silent on the role of neighbourhood development plans in terms of their roles, in terms of moving forward with obviously the proposed changes to the planning system. So at the moment, their actual role is a bit unclear in terms of obviously how they will be developed and integrated into the planning reforms that are on the horizon. But we are actively working, like I say, with Denmead Parish Council and Hursley Parish Council on their neighbourhood development plans. The key thing is that neighbourhood plans are one tool, but the local plan can actually do quite a lot, a significant amount. And obviously a neighbourhood development plan has to be consistent with the local plan. So a lot of the things that, for example, we've been talking to Winchester Town about is obviously how can we incorporate, and we have incorporated, elements that have come from their work into the local plan. And that's a really important issue. So if local communities have got some evidence base, we can do a lot with the local plan to integrate that into the local plan. And that avoids obviously the need to actually prepare a neighbourhood development plan. They are an important tool, but they're not necessarily right in every situation. Thank you.
Thank you. We're making our way towards the 12 o'clock, so I'm going to try and make sure we cover a variety of questions over because more have been coming in. But actually all of the questions will be answered and they'll be put in as an FAQ on the website. So if I don't get through your question today, I can assure you that it will be answered separately on the FAQ. And Hampshire Swifts has just raised the point that biodiversity net gain is an important concept when planning new housing developments. However, building spaces for nature into new developments, e.g. integrating nesting sites for declining urban bird species, doesn't contribute to biodiversity net gain. How can the local planning ensure these vital contributions to enhancing nature in these new developments are not overlooked? With 700 homes a year, if built in with nest sites integrated into each new house, this would make a huge contribution to the conservation of these declining species, and the well-being aspect of encouraging nature into these places can't be overemphasised. I think that's a comment really rather than a question, and I absolutely do encourage you to put that into the biodiversity section on citizen space. That would be really helpful, thank you, and possibly to get others of your supporters to do so too. Roger has asked, you've highlighted that 28% of the population will be elderly, so why is there no provision for housing for this age group in the rural communities? And why are you allowing high-end properties in these areas when existing housing would satisfy the need if they were freed up? I think that might be Simon or Adrian to answer that one.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. I can make a start on that. The Council has produced a strategic housing market assessment as part of the evidence base for the local plan, and I'd really encourage you to have a look at that document. What that document does is it identifies the different types of housing that will be required in the district moving forward. So in other words, what type of housing are required. Now clearly, as we've got kind of an ageing population, we need to think about that and plan for that as part of the provision of obviously the housing. And that I would encourage you to have a look at the Council's strategic housing market assessment, because it breaks it down by different types of housing that is required, and that can obviously inform the local policy moving forward in terms of the types of dwellings that are required. Thank you. Thank you.
The next question is, can the local plan help unlock the stagnation that exists in the town, e.g. Silver Hill? Perhaps you'd like to talk about the vision, Simon. Would this be appropriate for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Thank you, Councillor Porter. I mean, I think it's interesting because it goes back. There's a theme, isn't there? We can designate sites for development, and we do that, and that's done through the local plan process. And that includes redevelopment sites, and I think they're likely to become increasingly important because, you know, we're going to follow, I think as most councils, our brownfield approach first for all forms of development where possible. And now it may not be possible to deliver everything against that. But when you look at sites within the town, etc., then planning policy is there to help facilitate and promote the redevelopment of those sites, whether it's Centre of Winchester Regeneration, you know, previously known as Silver Hill, for example, or other sites that are identified specifically within the existing local plan and are very likely to be identified again in the new local plan, and they may be joined by other sites. So that's really important, because what the planning policy does is it sets the agenda effectively for what type and form, etc., of redevelopment of those sites is going to be acceptable. You can add detail to that, and we did that for CWR with the supplementary planning document, which layers policy over the top of the parent policy, if you like, which is the local plan. So that can enable and promote development or redevelopment of sites, but the development process is made up of a number of different components, of which planning is an important one, but not the only one. And there are other factors which can influence the delivery of and the timing of delivery of redevelopment schemes, and it can be the state of the economy, you know, it can be demand, which can change over time for particularly different types of land use, for example, and there can be all sorts of reasons, you know, a myriad or different ownerships across a site, which may be one planning policy site, but it could be in 2, 3, 4 different ownerships, and all of these things are part of the formula that you need to crack effectively to get the site delivered. And to get it funded, financed, and over the line and developed. So planning is really important because it can identify the opportunities to bring those redevelopment sites forward, and that is a really important part of it. But it's not the only part of it, and there can be other constraints or other factors that come to play which influence how quickly a site is redeveloped. And I think that's it. So these are complex pictures. So what you need to do, therefore, particularly where the council has a direct interest in that, is to join all of those dots together. And to look at ways that you can bring those sites forward. And the reason the vision is interesting, which is a piece of work done with the town effectively, it was basically saying the how, not just the what, is really important. So it's how decisions are made and how things are delivered. The other interesting thing about that actually was, for some people, perhaps the majority of people actually, one of the messages coming back was 100 small things are as good or more important to them as one big thing. So there can be a number of things that can be brought forward. They're not all to do with planning or development. They can be doing all sorts of different projects, which communities can be enabled to do themselves and deliver themselves. So there is that element as well. So the vision work, which is part of the evidence base for the local plan, has identified some interesting issues there about how to deliver stuff as well. So those are all things that the council, not just the council as its planning authority, but the council can take on board. It was a very sort of well-rounded document, I think, which is, again, if you get an opportunity to one great win website, if you Google it, it'll come straight up, and you can look at the handbooks there which set out the vision for the town and immediately surrounding area. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you. The questions are coming thick and fast now, and we're coming to our end, but I think there's one couple of things really. Some people have asked what's the definition of a market town. Michael's asked that. Well, actually, again, if you look into the review and facilities to inform the settlement hierarchy under the Homes for All, that comes up in there, and it really explains what we consider as a market town and which we consider as our larger urban areas. And then there's another question regarding fly tipping and that sort of thing. That is actually a separate subject, and we can raise that separately. All the questions will be answered, but I'm just going to finish off with what's the definition of a 15-minute neighbourhood? Adrian, I'm going to finish off with this one.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. This is a new kind of an emerging concept. The kind of concept is that you provide a kind of a menu of policies that provide residents to kind of access to most, but not all, of their facilities and services by a short walk or bus or bike ride from their home within 15 minutes. The key to this is obviously reducing the amount of time that people obviously jump into their cars to access services and facilities. This concept has been embedded in the work that the Winchester Town Forum has done in terms of their vision, and we're keen to see whether or not we can integrate that into the new local plan, because the main thing is that people should be able to access the immediate services and facilities within a 15-minute walk or bus or cycle ride. So the main thing is that you stop obviously people going into their cars so that they can access the services and facilities. But we are keen, like I say, to see how we can extend that into the new local plan process. But there's been a lot of work on that. Please do have a look on the website about that, because the Town and Country Planning Association, the Royal Town Plan Institute, has done a lot of work, which has included research in this country and abroad about the success of a 15-minute neighbourhood. But it's a very good concept, because obviously it's at the heart of obviously what we're trying to achieve in the new local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm really sorry we can't get through all of the questions. They came through thick and fast towards the later part of the meeting, so I couldn't speed up or slow down anymore, but all those questions will be answered, and I will check that those questions have got answers, and we'll make sure they get onto the FAQs next week. Thank you, Adrian, for answering so many of the questions, and to Simon. We had other people on the screen, but I think time was pushing us. Thank you to you for asking so many really interesting questions, and there are still many more to see on there, and as I said, we will come back to you about those. I'd like to really thank you most of all for attending today's event. It's been really thought-provoking and has raised some of the issues that I think a lot of people are worried about and are concerned about, as well as excited about what a local plan can do for our district. So we just like to conclude by thanking you for attending this event, reminding you that you can go onto Citizen Space on www.localplan.winchester.gov.uk. If you've got any feedback about this event, there's a link on your screen that you can go to immediately, or you'll be emailed afterwards with that update. And we really do want you to take part. Please do respond to this. This is the basis on which the local plan first draft will be written. And so it's really important that we get your views. And if you're representing an organisation, there's an opportunity to say that too. So thank you very much for attending today. And we really do, we hope we hear from you in the near future. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.